All right, we're running live here with Bitcoin Liberty Live, Bitcoin patriotism, freedom money, and we're having our little first inaugural podcast to talk about Bitcoin things, economic things, history, freedom, liberty, patriotism. And, I'm Fritz with Satoshi's Militia, and Daniel and I here, my compadre, we're going to talk about all kinds of Bitcoin stuff. So.
Yeah.
It's been a busy week.
Yeah.
Lots in the news. Just this morning, I watched a good video with Matthew Cratter, Bitcoin University.
Yeah.
He dug into the samurai situation.
The wallet. The guys that they get arrested or something? They're in jail now, right?
Yeah. One was in, I want to say, Virginia. Got picked up, arrested. Charges from the FBI. The other guy was in Portugal, got arrested over in Portugal, is awaiting extradition from there to face charges of
money laundering. Yeah, it was money laundering and unlicensed money transmitting, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the initial calamity hit me hard. Marty Bent and Matt Odell were on Truth for the Commoner, and I listened to that, and it's feeling like heavy times. On one hand, I feel like this is the beginning of America attempting to wall off Bitcoin as it walls itself in. On the other hand, Samson Mao had a good post about it, kind of putting it in perspective that you could say, okay, the FBI is targeting the mixing service specifically in combination with things that Samurai was posting out there that could be considered encouraging criminals to use their system, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure they were overtly quoting criminals. I mean, I think somebody had posted something that was saying, they were like, hey, this is great if you're a Russian oligarch. And, they're just sort of poking the bear, I guess, for a lack of a better term. But I don't know.
So I guess I don't know where the trend is going with all of this. If there's more to come, or if they're just starting with the low-hanging obvious issues, and if there's more, or if this was just a one-time deal because it's not that you can't run a Lightning node, a Bitcoin node. It's not that you can't use services that move money and do this stuff. It's the on-ramps and off-ramps that are KYC that obviously they regulate. But if you run a mixing service that also says, hey, this is money's for criminals too, come use it, criminals.
Yeah.
Then, they start there. They don't want that. It's like saying, you can launder your money here, criminals. I get it. Also, the technology itself could be used by anyone for any purposes, and how do you know?
Yeah.
So where do they stop their regulation?
Well, I think the easy answer is they don't, right? Like, that's... and that is sort of the basis of all, like, money laundering rules anyway, right? I mean, the entire premise underneath it all is... It's a crime to profit from crime. And if you sort of trace that out to its logical thing, right, it's, of course, it becomes a ban on crime. And if that was effective, then they could have just said, hey, you're not allowed to commit crime. So it's a fundamentally flawed sort of premise that they're coming from, but it makes enforcement of things like this really easy. And so if we just accept as true that money laundering can be a crime, then we're already sort of off on the wrong foot. Mm-hmm. Because it's a preposterous concept to just say, hey, the money that we issue, you're not allowed to use unless we verify what use you're putting it to. Mm-hmm. And a post I just put on Twitter this morning, I was saying, they've banned self-custody of cannabis for 60 plus years. Didn't work. It clearly can't work. It's nearly impossible for something like that to get enforced, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, me personally, I'm not too concerned about self-custody issues and things like that. not so much that they won't try or they might try, or it's all sort of like, kind of, who cares to me. You just go, well, they can try whatever they want. They tried to ban pot and heroin and cocaine, and what they got was fentanyl and all this crazy analogs of stuff, and they're just constantly circumventing DEA rules on chemical imports. And then they start drifting into this weird thing about, like, what precursor chemicals can you possibly use, and then you just get into, like, well, we're just going to ban chemistry, and you go,
Exactly.
how does that work, right? And who's going to be regulating that, and who has the resources to do it? And the thing I said on Twitter is, like, there's a ban on currency in every prison. You can't walk into a prison with $100 in singles and start doling them out. That's banned. Doesn't mean they don't use currency in prison. They use ramen, they use nuts, they use cigarettes. I mean, you name it. They just come up with an alternative method for accounting. Same thing with drugs, though. The drugs are banned in all prisons. You can't do heroin. You're not allowed to have fentanyl. You're not allowed to. But every single prison has those things floating around, readily available. I mean, and if you talk to people that live in them, they go, it's easier to get drugs inside than out, right? So, I don't know, man. I mean, in terms of, like, money transmittal and all that, the bigger thing is as soon as they start trying to go down that path, they have to go prove all that in court, and then it has to align with the rules and regulations, and then it has to make sense. And there's a lot of opportunity there for things like that to get called into question. If it starts becoming a constitutional matter, and if you just, all it takes is one judge to go, yeah, that's a constitutional problem, then their whole thing falls apart. And if you look at, like the Apple case, when they were trying to say, hey, we need backdoor encryption and stuff like that, they backed off real quick because they found a way to sort of circumvent it themselves, but B, it started implying all sorts of other issues that get harder and harder and harder to argue the further and further up the chain you go. And whether you like Trump or not, he gave us a Supreme Court that I think is very motivated to ensure that we preserve sort of fundamental liberties in the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and part of Samson Mow's perspective was that, calamitous as an initial little event seems to feel.
Yeah, thank you.
We do still have, reasonable due process and law and order in this country. We have a very involved and often detailed justice system. It grinds slowly, but it can grind finely, and ultimate outcomes can be quite good for the long term, with the right courts and lawyers involved. But then you look at Edward Snowden or Julian Assange, and it's like, what is going on with these types of cases where I don't always trust that. In the work that we do and the knowledge we have about the justice system, I feel like I understand the processes of justice and how it needs to work out. I know that the courts have ruled that code is speech, and that so you can code stuff up, open source stuff. You can't stop it unless it's inherently protected for good reasons.
Right.
Then they make an example of people too.
Oh, certainly. Yeah.
They'll catch something that they can make an example of, and it makes those people's lives miserable or horrible when you kind of say, hey, a little perspective here. Then in the aftermath of this recent thing, you see Phoenix Wallet pull out of the Apple Store. Wasabi Wallet has, with their Z Stacks, I want to say, pulling out of America. Zeus claims they're sticking to it, self-custody. They're, running a Lightning node is not running a bank. But Jack Dorsey, when Phoenix pulled out of the Apple Store, he's like, this seems quite unnecessary. This is unnecessary. Mm-hmm. I agree, but it chills the culture. If you're running a business, you realize, the gates are narrow now, or they're watching. How do we navigate this?
Yeah.
Self-custody is obviously the way to go, but using exchange is really so convenient. You don't want to be working with exchanges and have your random company say, Yeah, you can use this in El Salvador, but not right now in America. And then suddenly everybody's pulling their Bitcoin out, or doesn't know what to do, or feels stuck, or cashes out.
Yeah,
Freaks out.
yeah. Well, I think part of the trouble people are getting, and I think it goes to sort of Sailor's point on things, like as a transactional medium, Bitcoin is problematic, right? Um, and not least of which, I mean, for U.S. citizens, like I know there's a ton of people that go and they'll use Lightning on everything. I always see that and I go, you are incurring capital gains tax on every single transaction you're doing. And while people might play fast and loose with IRS rules and go, oh, well, I don't really have any crypto or anything like that, I go, well, they might catch up with you someday. They just hired 85,000 goons to come along and start sifting through your stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you boil down the Bank Secrecy Act and where all this AML shit came from, it's 100% related to tax avoidance. I mean, it's always been about tax avoidance. They've never cared about terrorism, narcotics, any of that kind of stuff. Those are all little things they can use to try and clamp down further on making sure that you're paying your fair share, quote unquote. So as a transactional medium, like Bitcoin suffers from volatility short term, and everyone's aware of it, right? So like I just paid for a tattoo using Bitcoin, and when I sent the Bitcoin, it was about $250 worth. By the time I was getting my tattoo, it was about $200 worth. So I'm kind of
the agreement had been made.
Yeah, but that runs into the problem is you go, because you can very easily find conflict in that. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out. Someone goes, well, hey, you sent me $250, but now it's only $200. You still owe me $50. No, the guy didn't do that. He accepted the implicit agreement that what this is worth right now, and yet that you cannot premise an economy on that. That just won't work. Like that will 100% fall apart.
Was that when Bitcoin was like at 67,000?
I think it was right at
took a 62,000.
Yeah, exactly, 100%.
It was like what the volatility hits people, and our natural monetary language is in the dollar. So the dollar just seems like it's some stable coin for us.
Right.
It translates everywhere. It's just the dollar. What you don't see in that hidden number behind the scenes is how it's just steadily melting. Like, okay, yeah, I'll pay you $250 for a tattoo today. Right. Hold on to it because in a year, it's worth $200.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't see that. They don't think of that because it's the dollar.
Right.
Bitcoin, oop, up, it's down, oop, up, down. And if you have that mindset, well, okay, see it for what Bitcoin is and hold it. Just hold it.
Right.
And, it's also a learning rabbit trail.
Of course. Well, that's what I was kind of getting at is like if you listen to Sailor, he's saying like, look, this thing is property as an asset or something like that. Eliminates a lot of those problems, because like all assets that you hold in lieu of cash, in lieu of money, whether it's real estate or gold or stocks or whatever, they all go up and down like crazy, right? And Bitcoin is no different in that if you lump it in that category, that group, that class of things, if you try and use it as a black market currency, like a lot of the cypherpunk movement is super, into, they go, we don't care about, Wall Street being able to park a bunch of Bitcoin on the balance sheet. We care about, like some freedom fighter in Malaysia that's trying to sneak around in the jungle and be able to buy bullets or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, you invoke the wrath of the state when you try and circumvent their capital controls, and you invoke the wrath of the state when you try and circumvent their sovereign issuance of currency. And when you start poking a bear like that, it's literally like going up and trying to tickle a bear cub while mom's watching. Like they just don't tolerate it. If you just go, hey, no, this is just like real estate, this is just like stocks, this is just like all the other crap that we invest tons and tons of your currency into, so we can protect ourselves from you, the sovereign, the Fed, then they stop caring as much. They go, yeah, well, that's the game. You guys figured out the game. We know the game. Let the plebs eat bugs and cake and whatever it is. We don't care about them. Mm-hmm. As long as they're still, feeding the demon, then we're okay. And ultimately, they just want a bunch of domesticated animals. If they have a few animals that have kind of figured out how the farm works and they're sort of getting all the corn themselves because they learned how to stash it somewhere, the farmer doesn't care. It's when the farmer starts going, hey, we're not going to use your corn anymore, that he starts going, hey, wait a minute, that's how we keep you domesticated, So the transaction thing, Lightning Network, I mean, it's cool. And yet, every time you or I or anybody does a SAT transaction, I'm going to buy a book, I'm going to buy a cup of coffee, I'm going to buy, it's like you're incurring capital gains or capital loss, taxable events that you need to be reporting. So whether or not these wallets come or go, the transactional medium to me is sort of irrelevant to what my broader thesis of what Bitcoin boils down to.
The thing about Lightning is that I don't know how you track that. When you have a Lightning channel set up, you have two parties on a multi-sig with just it's Bitcoin sitting on the blockchain. The Lightning network is just scurrying around steadily, constantly. I don't know that Chainalysis can follow Lightning transactions. Now they can just barely imagine that they do it on the blockchain, on the base layer for Bitcoin, but there's a thought that you get a Lightning channel set up. That is a form of freeing your Bitcoin, non-KYC, moving it around. Because from there, on the Lightning network, you can't track that.
Right.
At least currently, I don't know how you do that.
Well, presumably, if the hiccup in that whole concept is like, unless you acquired your Bitcoin initially, non-KYC, like you traded your Rune gold tokens or whatever in for some guy on a website somewhere. All fiat on ramps are KYC'd, right? All fiat on ramps that we have ready access to are KYC'd. And the clever amongst the world out there probably can hop on a VPN and figure out how to get their money from point A to point B. But it's not a non-trivial thing to overcome the KYC requirements.
You have to dig into that.
Yeah, and I mean, if you were super clever, you could go in and you could buy some USDT or whatever, and then mix that somehow, and then send that off to some non-KYC exchange. And the when I was talking about my lack of concern about self-custody, it's more because proving beneficial control of something is really difficult if that path is opaque. Like they can say, hey, I can see that you signed up with Kraken Exchange or Coinbase or whatever. You dumped $10,000 USD, you bought Bitcoin, and then you sent it off to a wallet. And then from there, we see you had another transaction, and you go, yeah, that was fraud. What do you mean? This guy told me I could turn my 10 Bitcoin into a billion Bitcoin, and I believed him, so I sent it to him, and then he ran off. You go, well, prove that you didn't. And that you go, well, right there, you just cut off all line of inquiry because that's not how the U.S. criminal justice system works. They have to prove you did something. You don't have to prove that you didn't.
Right.
Because it's impossible to prove a negative. And the example I always give people is like, prove you're not cheating on your wife. You go, well, I'm always, well, you could have cheated on her while you're at work. You could have cheated on her on the way home from the grocery store.
We saw that you drove over this way. Now we know in that area there's women.
Right. So prove you didn't stop and talk to one of them.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it becomes impossible because there's always some little loophole in there, which is why we don't do that in the criminal justice. They figured that out 500 years ago. Like, we can't make people prove they're innocent. We have to make us prove that they did something, which is why that barrier for conviction is so high. So when it comes to things like self-custody, you go like, to prove that you beneficially transmitted this to a wallet that you control, I think is nearly impossible. And the resources that they would have to devote to that are exponentially hard to acquire.
It's not that they wouldn't try, and it's so like the Samurai wallet thing as an example. It's like fiat legal systems through certain tools will try initially and see where it goes. It's sort of like testing this justice system right now. Let's go here. Let's do this. Let's make it strong and harsh, and set that charge, and then we'll see how it percolates. But I always worry that it drifts the wrong direction. Thinking about your tattoo story, where it'd be like if you went to somebody and you said, well, instead of this fiat cash, I've got an Apple stock or some tech stock here that's worth this much right now. And the psychology of people, if there was a way, say like with Bitcoin, you can say, yep, see, here it is. I can prove it. You have it now. It's yours.
All right.
If you could do that, say with a stock instantaneously, there was this in people's minds, and I imagine it'd be like this lucrative feeling of, I just got an Apple stock, and I don't know entirely what that means, but I trust the idea.
Right.
I own a share, so we're all good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks.
So when it's something like that, it'd be like, ooh, oh, that's cool. Like, okay, in lieu of cash, it's a kind of diversification. It has this upside potential and ownership. Whereas with Bitcoin, for some people, there's an initial like, I don't know what that means.
Right. Yeah.
Like, okay, so I own it, but and they're thinking of the dollar, the on ramps, the off ramps, maybe the tax implications. They're not thinking that far ahead, or they don't know enough to know what that means. It's always kind of short term with the dollar. Like, well, can I get it out of an ATM somewhere if I need to buy stuff at the store tomorrow or whatever?
Right.
For Bitcoin, there's a big sort of hurdle psychologically to understand, like, well, what is money? What does it mean as a commodity?
Right.
I run into that constantly. I can describe Bitcoin and things, but people have to be willing and ready to sort of think about a bigger picture and also longer term with an understanding or sense that, call it inflation. You get that? Inflation? Right. You've noticed this stuff? It's not the shrinkflation or the eggs alone. That is a response to a broken money system.
Right. Right.
Do you know what that means? No. Nope. People do not understand what that means. I get really cynical about that sometimes because just this morning I was trying to think in my head, if the U.S. is going to build a wall, and ultimately they wall themselves off from maybe a global financial situation that is free. But in the meantime, where the U.S., where a majority of the world's economic powerhouse tracking things in the dollar, and so we're going to build a wall. And it might look like the wall is walling off Bitcoin, even as America is walling off itself and just doomed to, well, what they're going to have to unroll is like CBDCs and other regulation stuff.
Right.
That's coming. As inflation goes insane and everyone's feeling it. And what does that mean? So they go down that path. It scares people, and I don't think people exactly know how to grapple with it. I was thinking in my head this morning, what percentage of people, well, one, are like capable of understanding the big picture sort of situation? I think it's a lot of people, but it takes time. But then what percentage of those people are either, in our current situation, either they have the time and space in their mind to dive in because they care and understand it, but also do something about it. If you were like, okay, I get it. What do I do? Bitcoin. Okay. So what do I do? Well, you can start here, then go here, start there, go there. They're going to be currently, unless you're really good at computers or tech or willing to learn, you're KYC.
Yeah.
You're just KYC'd, or you're like, well, I've got a broker, they're going to do an ETF. Okay? A KYC with another layer of not ownership.
Oh, yeah.
We're good on coffee.
Yeah,
thank you. So not only are you KYC'd, but you don't own your keys. And not only that, to get it out, it's in such a regulated system, there's processes and layers that, yeah, they'll guarantee you a spot price, but to actually cash out, there's various process and perhaps approvals involved there. Plus, now, Crater and the TFTC folks have made it clear over a time now that they could do kind of like a confiscation of gold executive order, or the government could consider the ETFs as, okay, not just regulated, but government owned.
Right.
BlackRock.
Nationalized, yeah.
We're nationalizing this. Call it a national security issue, a response to an emergency. Just a good economic sound practice if we're going to implement communism here, guys. Wink, wink. The government just regulates it, but really holds the keys to the ETFs.
Right.
It's a confiscation.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're on and off through BlackRock and others, but even they would say, okay, we're benefiting from this on the numbers, but ultimately you're at the mercy of your government now.
Well, yeah, I could totally see that unfolding. And one of the issues they're going to run into, even if they decided to implement that sort of thing, is if you just think about the amount, sum total of Bitcoin under control of centralized entities like BlackRock or State Street or whoever is running these ETFs, not Vanguard, but like Fidelity and whatnot. Mm-hmm. That accounts for 3% of the float. And then everybody else, you've got these old school whales and those lunatics from back in the day that were mining this stuff and been sitting on it for 20 years or 15 years. And you go, well, so what about those guys? Because if I control 2% of the money supply or 3% or 5%, you go, I'm in control now. And you go, well, are you?
Right.
I mean, yeah, you can tinker with the price, but the whales have been doing that for 15 years. They just, I'm going to sell some, I'm going to dump some, wipe out these shorts just to play with them and then stack some more Bitcoin, or they just do it for a whim. I think half the time they'll just go out there and just start tinkering with the market just to for the lulz, as they say. So like all these issues, I think are ultimately great for just topics of discussion. They're great for like tweet storms and people freaking out and melting down, and so like Jeff Booth had a great interview recently, and I can't remember the channel he hosted it on. It's bookmarked on my Twitter thing, but he's saying like, people say, oh, Jeff Booth is naive because he's so optimistic, and he goes, no, I know all this stuff's coming. I just don't focus any energy on it because it's like I already knew. I've known for 20 years that this kind of stuff is coming down the pike. Like, you don't have to be a rocket surgeon to figure that out. You just go, well, it's coming. So, it's like trying to fight a thunderstorm by yelling at it and going, oh my God, the thunderstorm's coming. Like, you just get your umbrella out and get ready for it. And maybe your lawn chair is going to blow away, but you just go get another lawn chair, and you figure out ways to buttress yourself against the coming storm, and then you implement those things. You focus your energy on protecting your house and your people and the people around you from the coming storm. You don't spend a lot of time raging at the storm and saying, hey, we need to come up with a better weather system. You just go, well, that's coming. Sooner or later, though.
Political interests, for years imply that we're going to fight the weather crisis.
Right, yeah.
So that's the mentality, is that, no, we're going to control the world here with Bitcoin. Okay, say it goes dark and deep in America, and between the DOJ and the FBI, the SEC, the CFTC, whatever you want to, they all go all in, we're going to stop Bitcoin. Ultimately, what can they stop? Okay, so the ETFs are, like you said, to say 3%,
right,
whistling into the wind here on Bitcoin. As Bitcoin grows globally, the U.S. is walling itself off from an opportunity that we've never seen before in human history.
Yeah, and it's a porous wall, though. I mean, it's like trying to build the border wall. You just go, well, how hard is it to get around that? Like, well, there's videos all over the place, people scampering over them, throwing rope ladders, and it's not, those barriers to enact a structure like that can prevent the activity that they think they want to prevent. The border wall has to look like East and West Germany, like heavily fortified, no man's land in between, mines and guard towers every 100 meters, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and dogs patrolling. And I mean, it takes an enormous amount of resources to wall something like that off. If you talk about the digital network realm, you go, good luck. Like right now,
it's a wall that goes around the equator on the planet.
Correct.
So
let's
wall it off.
Well, that's the point. Is like right now, Netflix says I'm not allowed to watch some show because it's only licensed in France. So I just, for a $3 a month fee, I can circumvent that gate. I can't sign up for Binance right now because I'm barred from U.S. regulations. I can take that same $3 piece of software and circumvent all those controls, and I can use an AI to generate KYC verifiable information like that. Mm-hmm. So this idea that they're somehow going to be able to clamp down and control all this kind of stuff is more mythology, and it's this weird deference to the state. Like it's this weird, like, the state can do everything. And the broader trouble I have is like when people start, hey, we need to call attention to something. Like, hey, we need to call attention to this. If everybody found out, nobody gives a shit. Like, they just don't. And the most alarming historical precedent for this that I have is if you look at the Warsaw ghettos during World War II, the Germans came in and they rounded up all the Polish Jews and put them into these camps, these Warsaw ghettos. It's just a walled off area. And they, the yellow stars and all that kind of stuff, so they could identify everybody and they could surveil them, and their life was miserable under those conditions. Like the average caloric intake of the average Pole at that time was like 900 calories a day. In the ghettos, it was like 400 calories a day. And the thing is every day, it's not like the Germans came in and said, hello, everybody, we're here to pack you into trains so we can murder you. They came in and said, oh, no, no, we're just going to relocate you. This is just a temporary thing. Don't worry about it. Yeah, we're just doing these little things. And they present it as very reasonable and very logical sort of measures that they're taking. And at the peak of the Warsaw Ghetto, there was something like 400,000 or 500,000 Polish Jews living in the ghetto. By the time anybody bothered to fight back, that population had dwindled to about 3,500. Before anyone realized, they go, hey, they keep putting us on trains, and nobody comes back, and then I never hear from them again. But it's probably fine, it's probably fine, it's probably fine. It wasn't until they were nearly eliminated, they went, maybe we should fight back. And you go, if you can literally watch your friends and family being carted off in a train, and still have no impulse to stand up for yourself or to fight back, I go, what likelihood is there that right now our obese, medicated, domesticated citizens of the United States are going to rise up? What everybody, when they're complaining about stuff and going, we need to call attention, is they're going, somebody needs to go fix this. And I go, there is no somebody. There is no one's going to come save you because there's no incentive to save you. No one gives a shit about you. So your only option is you go, well, I can either get on this train and try and convince as many other people to get on this train that's going away from the mess, or you just sit back and just take your lumps because you're not going to do anything otherwise.
I feel like we're cultured to largely, get along, go along. Okay, we can talk politics, but it gets hot and you want to either walk away or compromise. And I don't feel like there's a spirit of independent liberty, willingness to take a stand. I feel like most people are deferring to an authority. Somebody else, someone fix this. Somebody's got to do something.
Yeah, someone.
Whether it's you think it's your local sheriff, or the SEC, or the courts, or someone, some company.
Right.
Elon Musk, come on, do something, Elon.
Save me.
Whatever. There's a deference to authority all the time. Ultimately, the government, criminally says, this is now illegal. And people are going to grumble and troll on Facebook and type away and post stuff and then do nothing.
Yeah, 100% of the time. I mean, we've already watched it happen. They closed the gold window in 70. And everyone threw his fit, and we can't do that, and then they just did nothing. And then they passed all these AML laws, and people, you can't do that, and then they did nothing. And 9/11 came and went, and they absolutely just decimated any semblance of privacy in the United States of America, and people complained about it, and they did nothing. The closest we've had to anybody actually standing up and acting was Occupy Wall Street. And what did they do? They went and pitched tents and banged on drums on Wall Street until they got thrown out. And that was it. End of story. They literally, but the symbolism was hollow because it matters not. They did nothing. They accomplished nothing. And they called as much attention to the situation as they possibly could. Hey, you guys just stole all of our money to give it to the banking sector because those guys have been grossly irresponsible with their management of our resources. And everyone went, and then they did nothing. Everybody voluntarily just locked themselves in their bedroom for 2 years because someone told them to.
Yeah.
So you go, well, if you're not going to stand up to any of that stuff, you're certainly not going to stand up to banning the samurai wallet. There's no, charge of the, and you can argue, well, maybe there's going to be some straw that breaks the camel's back and everyone's going to go storm the Capitol or something like that. Even the trouble with that, though, is at the end of that line, it's presuming that the next group of people that seize power, take control, whatever, are going to do it any better than the last jerks that did it. And history paints a very clear picture that that's just not going to happen. That doesn't. The next group comes in and they find themselves confronted with the exact same constraints, restraints, and problems that the last group had, and they end up making the same shitty decisions, if not worse. Because these new groups say, oh, we've got the answer now. And you go, well, like Saylor pointed out, if you look through history, there's always some guy that comes along and goes, I can fix it. He's like the Wreck-It Ralph guy. And then he just ends up breaking everything even worse, and people suffer as a result. And you only need to look at, Soviet Russia and Communist China, and you go, hey, those guys came in with the belief, like, we're here to fix it. We can fix this. And what they did was cause, 40 million people to get dead through starvation and torture and all sorts. I mean, so the structures that we exist in are long-standing, and they've taken forever to get there. And so this notion of like someone's going to come and fix it, you go, well, they've been tinkering with it for 600 years, especially in the West, our system in particular, and no one's fixed it yet. So if you're standing there waiting for someone to come fix it, you go, it's just you may as well just not bother talking about it.
So on the financial scene, people can be easily swayed and convinced by the problem is shrinkflation. The problem is that the restaurants and grocers are simply charging you too much. The problem is that corporations are greedy. The problem is not the money. Oh, believe me, we're in charge. Oh, we're watching those interest rates, and it's a delicate thread to navigate. But boy, they're on top of it.
Right.
People believe that. Mm-hmm. The only place they feel it is when they go to like eat out or shop, and then they feel like, well, that's the problem there. I can't see it beyond that.
Correct.
So they're convincible. They're convinced that, who else can we defer to but the genius is in charge. Right. I mean, who am I? I'm no economist. Jerome Powell is on it. It's hard, surely. So we're doomed. People don't see it or are distracted by what the problem is. They want to regulate or criminalize something. You throw your hands up. You're like, so I'll lose my job if I don't get an injection. Yes. Well, then what is it? 99% of people. I guess I'll get the injection. I'll wear a mask on for however long you tell me because I just want to get along. I grumble in my head. I think all these things, it's all hard. But I'm looking down, and it's something about something existential versus a particular problem with the people in charge.
Right. Well, I mean, the equivalent that we're talking about right now is like if you went to your golden retriever and said, hey, you need to get back to your wolf roots. And they go, what exactly? Go free and go form your pack and go hunt and be the apex predator in the wild. But it's a golden retriever. Like that has been bred out of them a long time ago. And all those impulses that you're talking about have been bred out of us. Like
I'll 100%. Do whatever you train me to do. So tell me how to do it. I'll do that. And you still feed me kibble, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Feed me kibble because without my kibble,
I'm kind of screwed. Yeah, I might get along out there. I don't know, but I'm a golden retriever, man. I just want to go up and like. I'm dopey and happy, and and you go like somewhere in there is wolf genetics. Somewhere in there, that animal has that capacity within them to try and call that forth and to tease it out and to like convince the golden retriever that hey, you really are a wolf and you can stand up to this and you have the power and you're so much stronger than you think. It's like, come on, man, it's just it's a wasted effort, and that's sort of why I get like when we talk about Bitcoin as like an asset, I go, well, the thing is, the people that are actually paying attention to this stuff, the people that have a vested interest in how this whole economy and everything works, I very much believe that they didn't do those bailouts just because they're like greedy. They're not Scrooge McDuck sitting there going like, we can stack more gold this way.
They saw that there was a problem and they wanted to fix it, and they put Goldman Sachs in charge of the whole thing.
Well, yeah, and the at the core of that, you go like, if you truly understand what that problem was, you go, there's zero tolerance for that. Those same people that we're just talking about, it's like the golden retrievers. If you just told the golden retriever, hey, all your kibble's gone, all your blankets are gone, your house is gone, you're going to be on the street, the dog is not going to react well to that. It's not going to understand why it's lost all its kibble. It's not going to understand like, hey, well, there's this whole complex derivatives thing, and actually, if you really boil it down, there's no counterparty to any of that risk, but they've now blown it up to $600 trillion worth of risk being mitigated or managed with zero counterparty to any of it. So if it unwinds, everything that you know and do just goes away, like magically, overnight. And there's no tolerance for that. Nobody wants that, including those people at the top. And when they stop and look and they go, oh, we really screwed the pooch on this, like, oh, God. I don't think the impulse is like, well, we need to figure out how to enrich ourselves further. That was the result. And yet I think if you talk to any of them, they're not going to sound like greedy Scrooge McDucks. They're going to sound like very sober people that were trying to navigate something that may or may not have been a direct result of their input, but they're looking at it going, if we let this thing go, it's going to get ugly. Like lots and lots and lots of people are going to die. In the order of hundreds of millions, if not billions of people will be starving soon. and they are not equipped to deal with it. Just like domesticated farm animals, if you just let them out in the wild, most of those animals are not going to survive. They're going to be food within 3 months.
Well, equipped to deal with it, in my mind, the central banks in hand with the government prints kibble, and they want us all to be the happy or whatever, happy enough, won't fight, won't be the wolf. They want us to be the golden retrievers.
And we
Happy
are.
to be here and obedient.
Yeah.
They can print the kibble. So even as things go bad and the kibble gets more and more full of just, bugs,
Literally.
they can make the kibble flow. They'll make it, say, a CBDC, the new kibble. And instead of your bowl feels smaller and smaller and smaller, and then it's like, oh, the golden retrievers might start to nip at us or bite at us now, or they're getting ornery.
Right.
Okay, hey, doggies, we got a new kibble.
Yeah, and a new bowl.
Look, it's a bigger plate. It's a bigger pile of your centralized digital kibble currency.
Yeah.
And just by moving over to this other plate, and yeah, you can still eat the other one too, but it's going away, just so you know. The new and better kibble is better for you, and you get more of it. See, the numbers, it's a bigger number.
Yeah.
And you can use that bigger number for your bigger numbered stuff now. Eat the new kibble, and also it's just going to be the new kibble.
Period.
Plus, you're going to get a bunch of free kibble right up front. We're going to issue forth, if it's UBI, Universal Basic Income, or if you just apply for it, if you have some hardship, here's some more.
Yeah.
In lieu of this or that, here's some more, and you just get hooked. It reinforces the system we have of deferring to authority, being reliant on authority, giving up self-responsibility, and feeling like a fight is just that much more of a steep hill to die on.
Right.
So why fight? It's too hard. Plus, life's hard enough. We're busy.
Yeah.
We're working. We're sold on propaganda that is quite distracting. So,
Yeah.
what are you fighting? You don't even know.
Right.
But there's more. There's a bigger pile of kibble here. Well, chow down.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And now, say when I think back to the American Revolutionary War and the Satoshi's militia efforts being education on some of those roots, the spirit of independence and freedom. Why did we separate from Britain? What was the point? You look back on it, you're like, I don't know. Were they just a little crazy? It was a different time for sure, but they had that in them. And you boil it down. What percentage? You mentioned the 3% making a blow in the wind. In the American Revolutionary War, say 3% of people actually were just willing to throw their lives down, put it all on the line, and fight physically and lose potentially for the sake of an idea and for freedom. Again, facing feelings and overtly and subtly oppression.
Yeah.
But we wanted to be free. 3% can make all the difference in the world of freeing a nation. On the other hand, 3% of we're going to build a wall around 3% of Bitcoin here. In America, maybe that makes a difference. That if you can convince people to make weird personal medical decisions for themselves and wear masks on their faces and not complain about KYC and everything else, well, maybe you've captured America. Yeah. People will complain. Let them complain.
Yeah, complaining is free.
Drama's good. Drama's distracting, and also we can steer that through random ideas.
Yeah.
And let them complain. Let them rabble rouse. Meanwhile, it marches forward. And what are you going to use but CBDC? And then, okay, people like us and others are saying there are escape hatches. There are paths out. You can be free. It's just different, and it takes a little time. And people are like, "Oh, you lost me at like having to think."
Right. Yeah.
You lost me. What'd you say, Bitcoin? Hey, read this article right here. Oh, you lost me at reading.
Yeah.
You lost me. It's too hard, too complicated.
Yeah.
Well, how does the dollar work? I have no idea.
Right. Well, and that's fundamentally correct, right? Like you just go, nobody gives a shit about any of this stuff. If you look at what people are really focused on, there was there's a group ran a website called OkCupid. They're a bunch of Harvard data scientists that put the site up. But they wrote a great book about the data they collected from that site. And if you look at the little information bubbles, like the search terms that they make the little bubble diagrams out of, like what do men like, what do women like, and there's like these overwhelmingly large bubbles for like trucks, football, barbecue, and then the women are like handbags and babies and puppies or whatever. I mean, like there is nothing on there. You do not see something that says like I really want to understand the complex derivatives market. Like that's not a big bubble.
Exactly.
Right.
When I was making my channel for the first time and doing Satoshi's Militia, Rumble and others would say, "What category is this?" And I'm thinking, history.
Right.
There's no history option. It was like entertainment, pop stars, bullshit, cats, dogs. And I'm like, history.
Nope, not
People
there.
don't give a shit about history.
They really don't.
History. Come on, people.
Yeah. Well, like a tweet that I just did about AML laws, like got a lot of traction. I've had a couple of them now where there's a lot of people like paying attention, retweeting and things like that. And it's just a very brief outline of like how we ended up with KYC. And you go, hey, well, like in 98, they tried to pass these laws and everyone was awake and went, hey, wait a minute, that's a terrible idea. It's none of your goddamn business what I'm doing with my money, and why should I have to present ID to do this, and how come you have to ask me all these questions, and why are we going to deputize all the banks in the world? Like, that doesn't seem right. How about you go and GFY? Mm-hmm. And then 3 years later, 9/11 happens, they go, ooh, here's a good time to get that in there. And the reason they stuffed it in there, I mean, you can come up with some sort of draconian, like deep state conspiracy about it. I think the actual honest reason was that the U.S. was pushing all these other countries to pass those laws, and then they couldn't pass them at home, so they just looked like assholes. And so they're like, we have to pass these. We can't ask everybody else to enforce KYC AML laws if we can't pass them at home. So when they found their opportunity, they took it. They just went, oh, this is a great time to do that. No one's looking. No one cares. But if you look at the amount of support that went into the USA Patriot Act, it goes like there's 2 Congress people on the entire floor. It was Ron Paul and some Democrat from California. Like, hey, no, terrible idea. You guys thought about this for about a week. How is it that we're just going to rush this thing through where we get FISA courts and warrantless searches and, what is it?
Well, just at the beginning of the week, they just renewed the surveillance.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, and at much protest. And, even, our local representatives and others were making a stink about it and saying, this is bad, this is wrong. It's only for foreign terrorism. Right. And it entangles things domestically, and then ultimately, who's watching?
Yeah.
Who's going to complain? And they're so secret anyway, who knows?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they do it, and quietly pass it in the dark of night.
Exactly.
And so here we have it. It's renewed. It's what has Breedlove and others said. There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government solution.
Right.
And every little emergency or concern creates a temporary government solution, and then we end up with these steadily sliding down the hill, permanent shifts in government, enforcement, culture, and then we're just used to it. It's like it's been that way forever.
Yeah.
Has it?
No, it wasn't.
It's always been this way, right?
Why? Yeah.
It has not.
Yeah.
Or like that, 9/11. Oh, that was 20 plus years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, but we're still there?
Yeah.
Well, yes, we are. We're still there.
Yeah, we're still there. And, all of it, at the end of the day, is just paper, right? I mean, so there's that sort of like abstract authority and abstract power, and then there's like actual power, right? And the way this gets wielded is by the consent of the governed, 100%. People say, hey, I don't consent to this because I'm complaining. I go, well, yeah, thank you. And, but it's tacit or implicit consent and assent to it. It's just by checking out. The thing that's sort of unique about what you're talking about around the Revolutionary War is you go like, what did communication look like during the Revolutionary War? And there's a great quote, I think it was Thomas Jefferson. He had written a letter to somebody, and he said, I apologize for writing such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one. And the sort of beauty of that thought is like, you have to take some time to compose a coherent thought and convey the information in a short amount of text. But our modern communication system does not favor that at all. It favors get the most popular, heuristically biased thing out into the world to see how many people will respond to it.
Does it pop?
Does it pop, right? And things that pop tend to do things like invoke disgust, fear, anger, anxiety, all that kind of stuff. Super easy to get things to pop. If it bleeds, it leads, right? The very boring, mundane part of that is very hard to convey. And so when we're talking about like, hey, we're going to have a revolution, we're going to go, there's a reason you can't motivate people because they can't pick which information matters. Mm-hmm. It's impossible. So they have to rely on these heuristics. And the heuristics favor things that do not lead to revolution. They lead to things that are like passivity and compliance. Regardless, all of those things where they go, we need to rise up, look what they're doing. That is ultimately demoralizing. That's all that information can do is they go, the state is all powerful. We can't do anything about it. We're complaining about it loud and clear. They don't care. They did it anyway.
And if they pick you, you might just have trouble yourself. Do you want to deal with that?
Right. So the ultimate thing is people bitch and they complain and then they just whatever. But they can still buy their Hot Pockets and they can still go get their Nintendo or whatever. And they go, yeah, it's getting harder to get my Hot Pockets. But
they're a little smaller.
Yeah, but I still got a Hot Pocket. Like they don't, it doesn't matter to them. Ultimately, when you're inspiring people in the revolution, like someone had to sit down and type something, write on a piece of paper
with ink and a feather and paper that you had to keep clean and saved somewhere, and it was rough
and they had to spend a lot of time thinking about how they're going to convey that message because they go, I get one shot at this. I don't get to just spam it on Twitter. I don't get to spam it on Facebook. I don't get to spam it on the news. I don't get to spam it in a newspaper. I have to think very carefully about this. It's going to be enormously problematic just to print this out and get it around. And so when people are reading that, they go, hey, here's some new information. The last piece of information I read was the Bible. So you go, okay, so what are your sources of information? Well, I got the Bible. I got a dictionary. And I got Blackstone's, history of the commentaries of the laws of England or whatever. And I got this. I go, oh, okay, I have 4 sources of information coming at me. The rest of the time, I'm solely focused on like how to increase my crop yields, how to shoot an animal better, how to skin things.
Cows need milking, and
There is no other distraction. So when you get that new piece of information, that novel piece of information, you go, hey, it affords you an opportunity to think about what you're looking at and go, this is an interesting point. I think we should do something about this. Let's all get together and do something about it. Today, you go, here's some information. It's just information overload. There's zero chance you're going to inspire some revolution, and that's why we're in the situation we are. No one is doing anything.
In my life, I'm always pushing to, I consider myself a kind of a futurist, if you will. I enjoy the ideas. I like to think about where we might be headed, and I want that to be a positive thing. I want the world to I want to see the path of where we're heading. I'm all for, I'm a humanist and I'm a futurist, and I want to see the exciting potential we have. I want to think out, like, where will we be in 100 years, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years? We're not going away, or I don't want us to. So what does that look like? I have that curiosity.
Yeah.
So I think about avenues that those can take, Bitcoin being the biggest innovation in freedom tech money humanity has ever had. So Bitcoin being a huge sudden freeway in that direction. Other new technologies that have come about, I'm excited by it.
Yeah.
So I'll be excited about something, some new innovation, some new technology. And I went to a training recently where the person was talking about management and leadership.
Yeah.
And he said, people are far more impacted and affected by something negative. And so say you have a negative experience or something that scared you or some fear or crisis. You can have one of those and get stuck on that. Your brain remembers that. It's a survival instinct that oh, stay away from that. I'll never forget that. Don't eat that red berry. Never again.
That's a problem, yeah.
It takes 3 good positive memories and experiences to overcome one negative one.
Right.
So I'll have a positive thought in my head, something like a vision, a goal. I'm working on something. I'm committed to something. And I'll have a bad experience, collaterally about it maybe or otherwise. And I have to reinvest myself and overcome that, because you can easily be like, oh, well, the FUD kicks in. A little fear, a little uncertainty, a little doubt. And I have to remind myself, keep going.
Yeah.
What you see in the media, fear, anxiety, uh, existential angst sells.
Right. Constantly.
Constantly. People are feeding off this trough of, geez, the oceans could boil. There's too many people. We're running out of this. There's a crisis over here. The world is, oh my gosh, it's a train wreck.
Right.
As we're living the best lives we've ever had. Not that things are great everywhere, or there aren't problems, or there's a trend happening like we're talking about.
Right.
As we're sitting here enjoying amazing technology, communicating with as many people as we can reach out to, we've never had before.
Right.
In comfort.
Yeah.
I have options.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can have these conversations.
Yeah.
When in the history of America we've been able to, or in the world, been able to do this with such access and outreach and options, even as I'll read a headline and be like, oh shit, gee, maybe I should give up.
Right.
It sells. And so a lot of people are in I think a constant kind of a mode of, well, Biden, well, oh, Trump, oh, yeah, the banks, I don't even know what that means, inflation,
right?
There's air in the Doritos bag,
Yeah, exactly.
But it's distracting, and
right.
It basically promotes. I'm good, thank you. It's conducive to, say, powers that be being able to march steadily in controlling directions. And what are we going to do but sort of just deal?
Yeah.
Or there's hope out there. There's avenues out there. There's opportunities and things, and you see it. And people are doing it. You see it everywhere. People are taking advantage and doing that. I think it's important for people to remember, you don't give up. You see a headline, or there's something that happened, and you keep your perspective that, for me, Bitcoin being hope, it's a reminder of the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
And my hope in humanity, honestly.
Certainly, yeah. And I agree with you 100%. If we can just allow ourselves enough grace to just kind of look around and go like, hey, your day-to-day world is probably annoying. Like you got to wake up and go to work and your knee hurts or whatever it is. And yet on balance, you kind of go, well, I didn't have to go hunting today to make sure I got my food, and I didn't have to boil my water, and I turned a knob and water came out, and I turned another knob. And
I can take a hot shower whenever I want.
I turned another knob, I had fire. I turned another knob and I got, a TV, and I turned another knob and I got this. And that's the extent of your burden, in existing in this modern world. And that's sort of why I'm always tracing back to this idea, like, we kind of want to preserve that, like, if you just take as true that people are fundamentally domesticated, and I'm not pointing my finger out, it's, that's the finger going out and there's four pointed back. It's because we're all domesticated, and if you just pick a guy off the street and throw him out in the Canadian wilderness naked, go, good luck. Like, most people are dead, or they're going to come back they're not going to last 30, 45 days before they're toast. I mean, they just do not have any of those instinct survival skills. None of it's been taught to them. They have no idea even where to start. There is this very select, tiny sliver of human beings that might be able to make that work if everything goes their way. If they don't break their foot, if they don't have this, if they don't have this, if they don't get sick, if they don't get dysentery, if they don't get, so like when you put someone on that survival threshold, most in the world today fail, and will fail tragically. So when people start coming along and saying, "Oh, smash the state, we're gonna have to learn how to work again," and this and that, I go, you just don't understand what you're asking for. And the beauty for me of Bitcoin is because it does represent that hope. Not so much in that we're going to come up with this new overnight monetary system that's just going to replace fiat, and suddenly, banks and all these people won't have power anymore. I go, it's a fantasy world. It's just not going to happen. It's never happened, and I don't see any plausible way that moves forward without mass destruction and chaos in between. What it does do is it offers people an opportunity to start realigning those incentive systems slowly, right? You go, hey, instead of inflating houses to a place where nobody can afford them, we can inflate this Bitcoin thing to somewhere where no one can afford it. But people can still, because it's divisible to 100 million places or 100 million units. And instead of inflating stocks to a place where the valuations are just ludicrous, like if you go, at one point, NVIDIA stock was trading at 115 PE. The market price of that stock was 115 times the price per share, like the earnings per share. And you go, based on that logic, you're telling me, the prospective stock buyer, that somehow NVIDIA is going to increase their revenue by 115 times, so this will make sense at some point. You go, of course not. Nobody thinks that. They just go, well, it's a better place to park it here because more and more people are buying it.
Yeah, it's less about the fundamentals and more about, well, it's a meta representation of value that holds its value there versus, say, the dollar.
Right, and the only reason it's holding any of that is because of the greater fool. They just go, well, someone's going to be dumb enough to buy it behind me. But sooner or later that runs out. And, and we're going to watch that happen throughout stocks, real estate, whatever, because it's not that you run out of fools. They'd be happy to keep doing it. They just run out of possibilities. They go, we can't keep inflating this because no one can afford to buy it anymore. So the thing is Bitcoin is an alternative asset in that regard, that there's always an opportunity for that next person to buy it. There's no cap to how much of this inflationary madness that thing can absorb. And so as more and more people realize that, and that exponential growth curve starts taking off, the incentive becomes like, we still have a fiat system. We still have all these structures that are catastrophically bad and harming people. And we can start shunting that off into something that doesn't result in that, right? So we can gradually blow up that Bitcoin reserve and start deflating all these other things without catastrophically collapsing the economy. Because as I mentioned earlier, you've got this entire derivatives market that is predicated on risk in those assets, and nobody is a counterparty. There is zero counterparty to that risk. Credit Suisse found out that the hard way just last year. They went, hey, who's the counterparty here? Oh, they went bankrupt. Oh, so what happens to all our derivatives? Oh, they're gone. Like, just gone, just write them off. And they go, that's all of our assets. And they go, I guess you don't have a bank anymore. So if that is allowed to occur on a global scale, and you go, what that is your CBDC. That is your inflection point. And there will be zero appetite to fight it from anybody. From all the ANCAP people, from everybody. They can go wander around with their fur skins and their muskets and think they're going to survive that somehow. If that derivatives market, if that counterparty risk actually comes out and comes to light and all global banks fail, just ask people in Argentina what that looks like. And what it looks like is you wake up one day and you go to the grocery store and you go, I'd like a gallon of milk, please. And they go, sorry, we can't accept cards. Oh, well, do you take cash? Nope. Oh, what? And you go to your local bank and you go, it's closed. Well, how do I get my money out? ATM is turned off. Yeah, just figure it out. And they go, but I have things I need to, like gas. I'm almost out of gas. I can't, well, gas station's closed because they can't take cards. They can't take this. And that's going to percolate for about 2 or 3 weeks until everyone is flipping the F out.
We'd be on a lead standard at that point.
Well, what you end up with is chaos in the streets and people burning tires and rioting and going, hey, and smashing bank windows and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when they finally open them up again, they go, well, I know you had $100,000 in the bank. What we're going to give you now is 100,000 CBDC. You go, well, what's that worth? Well, if the exchange rate, it's the same thing except the exchange rate's a little different now. And where you had $1 before, it's now worth like 10 cents. And you go, but I still owe all this money. And you go, yeah, that's a problem. Oh, you can't pay your mortgage anymore because you don't have enough CBDC? Well, we're going to have to take that mortgage. Sorry, you're in default. You go, but you took all my money. And they go, well, not really. We're the sovereign. This is the money we told you to use, and now this is the money you have to use. So it wipes out everybody. It doesn't just wipe out like people like you and me. It's like all the guys at JP Morgan Chase and that executive board, they get wiped out. All the guys at Goldman Sachs, they get wiped out. Like, they just wipe out everybody. And when we get there, there's no way back. We just get the new system, and then we get to start this whole game all over again. So and there's going to be a lot of
some more coffee.
Please, thank you.
Thank you. And so that's your reset, and then they just go, hey, we promise we won't do that again, and then they build it all back up, and then
we had another runway of
100
What,
years.
another 100 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Same deal.
But everybody gets wrecked in that deal. I mean, there's going to be like, if you own a farm and you are living on a farm and you're out in the middle of nowhere and you own the property outright, you'll probably be fine. You might not even notice, because if you're growing your own vegetables and you're kind of just,
You have a smaller community. That, I mean, a network that's local and can provide, some barter.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I mean, and that happened in the Great Depression, right? There's like my grandparents, I asked my grandmother, what was it like in the Depression? She goes, well, I didn't really notice, because my dad had a job and we lived on a farm. Oh, so what was the Depression like? Nothing. It was just, kind of just, it was what it was. But if you think about the 6102, they literally just said, hey, you remember how your money used to buy $20 worth of stuff? Well, now it only, now
You're
we're going to take,
confiscating your gold.
we're taking 40% of the purchasing power just overnight.
And
Just
then,
by,
the price of gold.
yeah.
change.
So if they can just steal 40% of your money, and they've got a historical precedent for that, if the global financial system collapses, they're going to take 99% of your money, your purchasing power. They're going to give you, here's a million CBDC, and it costs $500,000 to buy a loaf of bread, but you got $1 million now.
Yeah, and my thought that the way it translates for people's consent is that the number will have to be larger, and even though it could scream inflation in people's minds, if they feel like the number is smaller, then they think they have less.
Right.
Which they'll have less anyway, drastically less.
Mm-hmm.
But if the number either kind of stays the same and looks smooth, or like, oh, well, you have more now, or you gain interest on this. If you keep it in, you're gaining interest.
Right.
As it melts.
As it melts.
As far as purchasing power, it'll have to translate for people where the numbers look larger, the numbers look sensible or manageable somehow, and they won't feel that overt pain, even as they can't buy as much or pay off their mortgage or whatever. Right. But there will be solutions offered. The gradually but suddenly thing is, with Bitcoin, I feel like it could very well be gradually and then suddenly. But the calamity is what I think the system's trying to avoid. Avoid the calamity.
Correct.
Keep it smooth. Keep the golden retrievers from getting wolfish.
Right.
And it may not be the lead standard. People have kind of an Armageddon fetish we've talked about, where there's exactly. They're in the back of people's minds, they think of The Walking Dead, like, oh, I could be fine. We could do this. No, screw it all. And cap, and let the system collapse.
Right.
It's not going to say collapse that way that people might want or like or think they have power over. It may just be, oh, it's still running. It's still running.
Yeah.
But how are you engaging that? Like, are you really off the grid?
Right.
And for how long?
Yeah.
And do you have that community? Can you barter yourself? Or do you need to engage with this system that is more steep against you?
Yeah.
Inevitably. So, it could be a gradually and then more gradually. It brings us to, if you want to talk about it, you're writing a book.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about your book at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of stuff. Great Realignment. Yeah.
In my mind, it, as I understand it right now, it speaks to this potentially gradually and then more gradually inevitability and hope of Bitcoin.
Yeah, 100%.
In the big system.
In the broader system, and that's sort of the argument I make. There's a great guy. His name's Eric Voskuil. He's a bit of a pariah among the Bitcoin people, and he's got a lot of very sensible things that he says. He has a book as well called Crypto Economics, and I think Bitcoin people should read it, and not to criticize it, but to just have an open mind about what he's talking about, because he has a lot of salient points. And the one sort of carve out I have from that is, it's on page 77 of his book. If you get the paperback, he says, I don't see a use for Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset. And I sort of flip that and I go, that's the only use I see for Bitcoin as a treasury reserve asset. And, Mr. Voskuil, I think, I never met the guy, I've never talked to him, so I couldn't say. I've heard an interview with him with another sort of Bitcoin pariah, Vlad, somebody or another. And he became a pariah because he had the audacity to talk to Roger Ver and give him airtime, and that is, verboten in Bitcoin circles.
Notorious big blocker.
Yeah.
And
correct.
Don't call it Bcash. It's Bitcoin Cash.
Yeah, got all bent out of shape and flipped off the camera and all that. I think that guy is a bit of a cartoon character himself.
Sure. He just wrote a book, and it's like, dude, you forked off long ago. Yeah. Just go.
Yeah,
go
exactly.
away.
Stay away, And yet you also have to look at the guy and go, well, he was pretty fundamental in the adoption of Bitcoin and the promotion of Bitcoin early on. And reasonable minds can differ, right? And of course, people say, "Oh, he did it for personal gain," and this and the other thing. And I go, "We don't know what he was thinking. He may have had genuine intentions. He may not. I don't know. I ultimately don't care. I think the big blockers are wrong. I don't agree with that thesis.
Sure.
I don't think, as a transactional medium, this thing is a viable, at least not in the short term. I mean, potentially long term, 20 years from now, yeah, absolutely, we could very easily see.
The technology might support bigger blocks that way, but nodes need to be decentralized.
Well, even without, yes, nodes need to be decentralized, and as price stability starts increasing with Bitcoin and its ability to be used stably as a transactional medium, I think increases exponentially over time. I don't think we're there yet.
No.
And I think putting the big block thing out now is putting the cart before the horse.
Mm-hmm.
So
and it's a fiat mindset of more money, more whatever on the base layer now, like Visa competing directly with Visa now versus, hey, there are layers that can run on Bitcoin here.
Right.
If you're doing that. But as a treasury reserve like you're talking about, we don't need that.
Well, as a treasury reserve, I look at it and I go, that is the solution I look at and I favor, not because I think it's the most optimal or ideal solution for the world writ large. Like if I were king for a day and I could say, hey, I get to reshape the world in a way that I think it would be more functional, I wouldn't necessarily pick Bitcoin as a reserve asset to sort of slowly infiltrate through the legacy financial system and then gradually realign incentives. I go, I would rather just have that happen. And yet I recognize, as we've been talking about all day, most people just aren't prepared for that. They can't even fathom it. And if you assume that there's probably 50-60% of the population literally doesn't have the cognitive capacity to process that information at all. You could show them every book, you could play them every video, they're just never going to get it. They never will, and they don't care.
They don't want to, yeah. And I get it.
And they don't even have the capacity. They literally cannot process it. You'd be like trying to explain concepts in quantum mechanics to them. They're just, you could explain it till you're purple. They're never, ever going to get it. Then there's that little sliver of people that could get it if they devoted a whole lot of time and a whole lot of calories to chasing that idea down. And then you've got the very small number of people in that, the top 10, 15% of cognitive processing ability that could understand it, and they are not motivated to understand it, or they are misled by other biases. So you're just left with this little tiny sliver of people that might get it. If I were king for a day and I could mandate it. So you go, well, how do you realign this so all these people don't get squished? And you go, well, we have a system that's been in development for 600 years, and if we can just slowly get that alignment going to where the economic incentives align with prosperity and growth and preservation of necessary institutions, like things like dispute resolution mechanisms, like courts. That's important, and they're there for a reason, and they're locked down the way they are for a reason. They didn't just dream that up last week. 600 years ago, two guys had gotten a fight about who owned what, and then it turned into a blood feud, and then the whole town got wrecked because these guys were fighting all the time. And they went, we probably need to come up with a better way to mediate disputes.
Have a ledger that we can reconcile.
Well, not even just a ledger. Have someone that stands in between and goes, that's right, that's wrong. You get this, you get that. Period. Rather than, hey, you get to shoot him, you guys get to duel, and then someone on this side goes, hey, that wasn't fair because he dueled wrong, so now I'm going to duel him, and then you cannot build a society along that. And the thing about the ANCAP folks is that naturally gravitates towards dispute resolution mechanisms anyway. And they go, you end up with private armies and then private security forces, and then you end up having top-down de facto control anyway. So you can say it's not, but you end up if you want to see a great shining example of ANCAP ideology, just go to Afghanistan, because that's precisely what it looks like in practice.
I'm pro-capitalism. Also, some ultimate capitalists was the mob.
Mm-hmm.
Just straight capitalism, and it's its own rule by force, or it can be.
Right. And so these mechanisms to temper rule by force are the system that we exist in right now. As flawed as it is, that's what we came up with. And yes, it's been vulnerable to being co-opted by people that seek power through things like debasement of monetary units and et cetera, et cetera. So it cannot withstand corruption. These systems can't withstand corruption, but that corruption originates from the ability to control currency units. Bitcoin sort of removes that. Bitcoin also gives an opportunity for those people to continue doing their little shenanigans, and gives those shenanigans a place to go for the people that are fundamentally in control of the economic system. Like, you and I have no effect on the gross economy of the United States of America. Goldman Sachs does. BlackRock does. State Street does. We do not. The fact that I go down and buy a bag of potato chips is meaningless. It's budget dust. Like, it's nothing, right? The fact that there's 100 million of us going down buying a bag of Lay's doesn't amount to a hill of beans, because the real assets are being held in custody by these massive conglomerates and institutions. And they're the ones that need to have their economic incentives realigned if we are to have any hope of preserving the rest of these institutions that we've come to rely on over the last 600 years. And so that's sort of the core thesis of the book. But the way I'm approaching it is I'm starting with money and questions of money, and then going down to like what power and greed means, and then how Bitcoin sort of fits into that. So that's what the book's about.
Bitcoin can be this ultimate kind of synthesis or natural destination in a capitalist system where, you know, you may be operating a company or a treasury that, okay, like Saylor said, you know who people who hold cash are called? They're called poor.
Right.
They're not holding cash. They're holding assets.
Right.
They're in fact heavily in debt on paper in cash.
Right. But
they hold assets. They hold property. They hold tangible or stock type assets,
equities,
you might say. Equities. As they look at the numbers, and they're not stupid, they're going to look at Bitcoin and compare the value holding and the long term, and the overhead that they have with Bitcoin. Is there overhead other than like managing key management or some the digital security aspects? Sure. On the other hand, you own an awesome business tower in Manhattan. You're beholden to the maintenance, the customers or clients or whatever's happening in the building, the taxes, the government. We're all
very well. Thank
you. Regulations, changes in laws. There's a new mayor in town. What does that mean? There's all these counterparty risks, you might say. So, so do you want the tower in Manhattan? And maybe that is a business model. Maybe there's a reason for that. Nothing against that. But is that all you can do? Whereas, well, we're not sure, or well, we need something in reserve on the side here. What makes sense? Is it all real estate, or could we just do Bitcoin?
Right.
And it may just be a sifting or a shifting, but over time, the alignment is what works.
Correct. And ultimately, the office building is a great example. If you go, we're Chase Manhattan Bank. We have an office building where we house our employees. And we own 4 other buildings. You go, what do you use those for? Well, we rent them to other people. So you don't need it for your business. Nope. It is unneeded real estate that we hoard so we can earn income and protect ourselves from monetary debasement. That we protect our balance sheet by holding this asset that depreciates for all the reasons you just outlined. Maintenance and weather and, bomb attacks.
Can't move it. You're not
can't move it.
Like, hey, business is better in Dubai.
Right.
We don't have a building in Dubai.
Right.
Can you just sell your building and build a new building? Well, yeah.
Maybe.
Over years.
Maybe.
Who knows?
Maybe. And right now they can't, which is why there's such a steep discount on a lot of these commercial buildings. But the same is true for like the boomer that holds 3 rental houses. They go, are you living in those houses? No. Do you need those houses? No. Why do you hold those houses? I'm hoarding these houses, preventing them from being on the market because I'm trying to earn income and defeat monetary debasement. I'm hoping these assets appreciate in value, in nominal currency value, faster than the rate of debasement. And that's the only reason to hold them. But what that does is it artificially distorts the real estate market. And it artificially inflates the cost of owning unneeded real estate that it would otherwise be depreciating if it was just left to pure market forces. So if you are suddenly given the opportunity to go, hey, I can hold this asset that doesn't have depreciation risk, that doesn't have rental risk, that doesn't have taxation risk, and it appreciates faster than the rate of monetary debasement, the only thing I have here is custodial risk. You go, well, that sounds like a better deal. Maybe I'll sell one of my houses to buy that asset instead. What that does, though, is it puts that house back on the market for someone else to buy. And if enough people start looking at that, because right now BlackRock and State Street and all those people, they're starting to get into residential real estate. The bulk of their portfolios right now is revolving around apartment complexes, multifamily, things like that. And they're creeping slowly into residential, single-family homes. 40% of the single-family homes in America are rentals, which means nearly half of the housing stock is taken artificially removed from the market simply because there's enough people that had enough money early on that they're trying to protect themselves from monetary debasement. So you go, what happens to the housing market if you increase inventories by 40%? You go, well, housing prices plummet. Well, what's that do for the 25-year-old kid who wants to start a family? Well, maybe he has a theoretical possibility of buying that house now. And if he's saving his money in Bitcoin, which is also expanding because everyone else is using it as a reserve asset, then maybe, just maybe, he'll have an asset that he can go, hey, not only is my purchasing power increasing because I'm holding this Bitcoin, but now houses are more affordable. And that's the sort of realignment of incentives on a small scale that I'm talking about. And that trickles everywhere. I mean, it's Eric V. Stacks is a guy I think everybody should follow on Twitter. And he very much aligns with Jeff Booth's sort of view on these things. And like that is the type of thing that we should all be collectively striving towards. And which is why it's one of the reasons I'm so committed to just orange pilling as many people as I can, because the broader that network goes, the more people that start getting on board with just like saving in this technology, and I'm full on, I'm 100% all in on Bitcoin. But if you just get every one of your friends to allocate 1%, and then every bank gets their customers to allocate 1%, suddenly this thing starts making a lot more sense. And the more people see that number go up, the savings go up, their purchasing power being preserved without having to take on all this additional risk with equities and like grossly overinflated equities and grossly overinflated real estate and grossly overinflated everything, art, collectibles, whatever, then suddenly they start going, hey, this makes more sense. But all those things get to come down gradually. And companies no longer have to preserve their balance sheets by reducing quality. They can focus on improving quality, improving their competitiveness, because they're not continually fighting debasement. They have a thing that's on their balance sheet that is protecting them from the debasement. And that's why I see Bitcoin as such a critical aspect to everybody, because of its ability to absorb that monetary debasement without distorting every other aspect of the economy along with it.
And regardless of your socioeconomic status or your income or anything, if you have that idea of, gee, thinking ahead down the road, I want some of whatever I have in a savings, in an investment, in something that I'm planning ahead for, whether that's a rainy day or for long-term health and wealth or generational wealth of some sort, whatever you're thinking of. A little skin in the game on Bitcoin would just make more and more and more sense for people, as opposed to the fiat mindset, say, of, now as humans, we need houses to live in. You got to live somewhere. You live in a house. We don't want people houseless, per se. Society benefits from stable, healthy households and families need homes. Homes are houses, or whatever that house may be to you. I think what people tend to think of in a fiat mindset, or they think this is like, I don't know how people think it works, but that houses gain in value. Just inherently, houses grow in value, whereas I could say, 10 years ago I bought a house for $500,000. A nice house, okay. Anymore, it's like a modest house. Just, what, $500,000? Does that seem crazy now? Anyway, call it $500,000. You buy a good, modest house. 10 years later, you feel like, I could sell this house for $1 million. I've done nothing to it but keep the lawn green and repaired the things that broke. But you haven't made an improvement on the house.
Correct.
You haven't added to the house. You paid your taxes, you paid your mortgage. How is that house doubled in value? Well, if inflation is in the high single digits or double digits, if you want to get real about it, if it didn't double in value after 10 years, you've lost money, even as you feel like, honey,
look at all the money we have.
We made money on this house. How did that happen? How did you make money on a house that you just kind of barely maintained?
Correct.
It didn't crumble. And even if it did a little bit, people buy a fixer-upper as with potential.
Yeah.
Is it worth $1 million? And if so, how? That's our money language falling into effect here, where number goes up.
All right.
And so as we're climbing the ladder is
sinking with you. Yeah.
The ladder's on quicksand. You're climbing the ladder. We're going up, honey.
Yeah.
Wait, the quicksand is still.
Well, you're walking up an escalator, right? You're walking up and down an escalator.
Up a downward escalator.
Yeah, 100% of the time. And Bitcoin, I think, to my mind, slows down that escalator, right?
Exactly.
And eventually Bitcoin becomes the stairs. Instead of an escalator down, it becomes stairs up. And given enough time and enough adoption, I think it becomes the escalator up. Well, and everybody benefits.
As it becomes globally adopted, it's easy to say, oh, we're early. It's easy to say we're early. It's hard to fathom what that means because of the exponential effect and that where Bitcoin is right now. Yeah, economically, it's early.
Right.
I've seen the graphs on the proportion of wealth on the planet that is Bitcoin right now compared to a lot of other places people park their money.
Right.
Bitcoin is so small.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's a shift that occurs, people are going to join for the number and may not get the movement yet.
Right.
As people join for the number, number go up. And there's a cascade effect. Oh my God, number go up. And there's that fiat mindset that, honey, we're going to make money.
Right.
Okay, maybe that's a reason to start. Say there's a global shift and the Great Alignment starts to really happen. And it moves, and number goes up. Now, what that means, hard to fathom. Number goes up, but at a point, say in a fantasy world, Bitcoin becomes more of that global reserve treasury, if you will. Not to say global reserve currency, but the global reserve treasury.
Right.
It could plateau at a level that's, light years beyond where we're at. But say it stabilizes and plateaus. If nothing else, people will have made the great brain realignment.
Right.
Instead of like gains, it's like as a savings, you put your money there, you're not losing ground.
Right.
Nobody's losing ground, at least. The supply is capped. The mining is based on the transactional fees, say, and just the necessity of securing the network for reasons. And if nothing else, people will feel like I'm not losing wealth. Now, if you want to compare it to any fiat that still exists at that point, you're doing great.
Yeah.
Your fiat is, if they haven't, descended into complete abyss, they're struggling.
Well, ultimately, what I think is the reason I'm so bullish on the treasury reserve aspect of Bitcoin is that it prevents the chaos that follows from continual monetary debasement. And if someone asks me, like, where do you think the upward price cap of Bitcoin is, I go, whatever the upward price cap is of monetary debasement it is to stabilize the system. And right now, like I said, there's a $600 trillion hole in its nominal value. Like the contract value, that's probably 6-7 trillion, something like that. But there's no counterparty holding that risk. So whatever it takes to paper over that hole is how much debasement we're going to have. And we saw how much debasement it took to overcome the 2008 debasement. And then they had that little wrinkle with the pandemic. And that's magnified all their problems by 100-fold. And so the amount of debasement it's going to take to overcome that and paper over that hole and keep this system even relatively intact is going to be exponential. It's going to be like people have no idea how much paper that's going to take to cover that hole. And so that is the theoretical price cap of Bitcoin. Is whatever it takes to paper over that hole is how high Bitcoin can go. And the thing is, there may be, because we don't know, like if there may be some theoretical inflation rate that's beneficial. We don't know. I don't think so. I disagree with that thesis entirely. And yet we've never really had a truly deflationary economy that's ever existed on planet Earth. So it's really hard to say. People speculate and they go, oh, well, with technology, things should come down. And, you go, yeah. And logically, that makes sense. And, and the Austrians, I think, have it right. And yet we don't have proof in the pudding. We can't point to an example and go, that's what happens when you have a deflationary monetary environment. And nevertheless, as that asset continues to grow and as those incentives gradually realign, what I think you'll see is that price stability curve, and then it will flatten out because it just becomes the thing that you save in. Mm-hmm. And what transitions after that, you kind of go, well, we don't know. But ideally, at that point, we get to maintain the stability of the society we have. We get to maintain the comfort of the domesticated peoples around the world, and then we get to sort of further domesticate the rest of the world. And then ideally, with that domestication, you have a sharp decrease in like violence and a sharp decrease in like warfare and a sharp decrease in all these other externalities that come from scarcity. Mm-hmm. And then at that point, you have all kinds of opportunities to go, well, where do we want to go with this? The trick is we have to get over that hump without killing 500 million people or a billion people or something like that, by starving them to death and by absolutely wrecking any possibility of the rest of the world catching up to where our standard of living is. And that's why I think Bitcoin is so important as a treasury reserve.
Well, and like, so the drumbeats of war, in a sense, just this past week, where, okay, America's going to seize Russian bank assets, and then Russia seizes American bank assets. And or you want to fund a war, you want to pass a 90 billion flow of cash into Ukraine and Israel and whatever else. So, we need to pay for this. We're not issuing a bond for people to buy. We're printing more money.
Right.
With a Bitcoin standard in existence out there and an alignment started to happen, you're printing more money, digging your hole away from the solution and burying yourself in the process. And so basically, yeah, they can do that. They can print more money and debase the fiat, but it's getting to a point where the outcomes of that are becoming more and more obvious and apparent as a bad idea.
Right.
Or the chickens are coming home to roost much more clearly.
Right.
In a year, we're gonna, the largest expense of, if you want to call it, that they collect taxes for a reason, that they collect taxes to pay things off. A majority of that amount would just surely go to paying off the interest on our own debt right now.
Right.
And how does that work? How do you pay that off? How do you ever pay that off then?
Well, you can't.
You can't pay it off now.
Well, you can't just as a function of the money. If you paid off all the debt, there's no currency. And that's the thing that people get tripped up on, is they don't realize, like, they go, oh, the United States needs to pay all its debt. Well, then there's no money in the system anymore. It's gone. So that can never happen. That's by design, right? I mean, this is all debt issuance from day one. And so, this idea of like, well, we need to pay down debt, we need to fix debt, this, that, and the other thing, those are fictions that are baked into the economic system that we've enacted through the Federal Reserve. And our predecessor, the Bank of England, did the same thing. I mean, that original loan to the Bank of England that allowed all this stuff to happen was a 1.2 million pound loan, so they could start striking, pound notes and whatnot. But if you paid off all the debt, then all the currency disappears with it. So what, in terms of like warfare and the fundamentals of warfare, like a lot of people question the United States and like how much money we route to defense and things like that. But that traces all the way back to the 1950s and the Korean War, because they had this big ramp up to World War II, and we got caught with our pants down with Pearl Harbor and all that kind of stuff. And then we devoted an enormous amount of resources in inflationary monetary debasement to fund the war effort, to ramp up production, to retool the entire United States industrial base towards making weapons, bombs, tanks. And a lot of them were shitty. Like if you look at the original Sherman tanks and some of those grease guns and stuff that were pumping out, they were just trying to crank stuff out as fast as we could to catch up to the German war machine at that point, which was far more advanced than ours, technologically speaking. And that huge ramp-up process was troubling to a lot of people in military circles. They went, hey, this is a problem, man. Like, if this happens again, it's really hard to marshal all those resources. It's really hard, and especially under a pseudo-gold standard at the time, to make this happen. And then Korea happened because they wound all that stuff down. They sold it all off. And then Korea happened, and they went, oh, shoot, we're starting all over again. We don't have enough stuff to go fight this new thing. And so they started coming up with this doctrine of like, hey, we need to be prepared at all times. part of preparation, though, if you're talking about ammunition and tanks and guns, is all that stuff is gradually degrading, and it needs to be expended, and it needs to be used, and you need people that understand how to use it. Because if you have a bunch of people who've been sitting on a bunch of munitions, and the only thing they've done is go out and shoot it at the test range or whatever, when it comes time to actually put troops in combat, you need people with combat experience to lead that effort, or else you have a bunch of people scrambling trying to figure out how to do it on the fly, and that is not good. So you go, why is the United States constantly in conflict? They need to expend those depreciating assets. They need to test those depreciating assets, and they need to give people experience on how to manage that if it blows up into another full-scale, outbreak of kinetic warfare. So there are reasons behind this that are beyond just the simple profit motive of like we need to profit off war, so to speak, and yet all of those things are aligned under this idea that like U.S. dollar supremacy, defending U.S. dollar supremacy, and defending corporate access to emerging markets and emerging markets with resources that the corporations need. So it all gets intertangled into that industrial military complex that Eisenhower was warning everybody about, because he could see that was the path that it's going on. He's going, wait a minute, and he was a general in World War II. He understood very well, like, hey, we need to be prepared for this stuff. And there's that devil's bargain, if you will, where they go, oh, well, we need to be prepared, but by being prepared, we're incentivizing a lot of really shitty actions and ideas. And in time, if you just watch the progression of that 70 years later, that those incentives are now aligned to, it's almost purely for profit, and you can see it. Yes, very well, thank you. Thanks. All that profit is now aligned to things like, hey, let's just go throw cash into the black hole that's Ukraine, and let's go throw the $2 trillion that just disappeared in Afghanistan, and let's go throw the few trillion that disappeared in Iraq. Where'd it go? I don't know, but we got to test stuff.
Right.
We got to improve our weapon systems. We got to improve targeting systems.
We got new technologies emerging and new reasons to build the new things and the new trainings and all that. And it's its own economy. And it props up the dollar in a way. The dollar is being used heavily, and it's maintaining the dollar, protecting the dollar in the sense of America being the biggest global military and protecting the dollar through proof of war. And it just maintains itself. Mm-hmm. Hell, some people are getting rich. So,
but again, that still traces back to economic incentives and economic alignment. And you go like, well, why is it that we're finding ourselves embroiled in these conflicts through World War I, World War II, whatever? That was all debt driven, and that it's debt driven because of money printing and central bank currencies and all that stuff. That's all implicated in all those conflicts. And it's always implicated in these conflicts because the sovereign always spends more than they have. And the way they've historically captured more is through outright capture, seizure of land, property, things like that, or by debasing and then fighting a war and then resetting everything. And that's the system we're in. They debase, and they fund all kinds of bread and circuses and whatever they feel like funding. And then the whole thing falls apart, and then they go blow up everything and start over. And that's where we're headed right now. For the first time in the history of mankind ever, we have a structure that is not controlled by anyone that can shunt all those forces off in a different direction. And that's why I always stress, like, we tinker with this thing at great peril, because we have something right now for the first time in the history of mankind. And if you think about that, 200,000 years of human existence and 50,000 years of recorded human history, or at least rudimentarily recorded human history, and 10,000 years of functionally recorded history, you go, it's never happened. We've never had that opportunity.
Yeah.
Let's not turn it into like, well, I want to be able to buy coffee and send it to my revolutionary friend in Malaysia.
Let's put JPEGs on it and sell them on some hot bullshit market.
Let's they're literally monkeys banging on a nuke with a hammer. You just go, you guys don't understand the gravity of the thing that you're playing with. You do not understand what you're standing on and how dangerous it is if you fuck it up. Pardon my French. And you do not understand how much potential is embodied in it. It's quite literally a nuke, like where you go, oh, if this thing touches off and it goes the right way, instead of a wave of destruction, you get a wave of prosperity that the world has never seen and cannot fathom. And if you got AI right behind it, depending on your view of AI, we are either about to enter into a world of like absolute abundance, or we're about to enter into a draconian sort of death spiral. But that both of those outcomes are entirely dependent on the economic realities of the situation that AI is growing up in, and the people and the incentives that they are getting that thing to bias towards human prosperity or human destruction. And if we don't fix this monetary instrument first, then you can just about guarantee if it goes the other way with the AI, then we're done. I mean, so Bitcoin goes to zero, if Bitcoin doesn't work, if Bitcoin gets captured, if Bitcoin can be censored, then you may as well just throw up your hands as far as I'm concerned, because there is nothing else coming to save you. There's the AI that will produce abundance is not going to materialize if the economic incentives are tilted the wrong way. Mm-hmm. And if we are standing on that precipice right now. We are George Washington going, hey, I think we need to fight. That is the moment that we're at in history, and so few people understand that it troubles me. That's the biggest, most alarming, anxiety-inducing factor of all this, is that there are people that are committed and devoted, and I think biased in the wrong direction about what Bitcoin is, what Bitcoin means, and what Bitcoin can become, and what Bitcoin should be. Mm-hmm. And I also have a lot of faith in humanity, and I have a lot of faith that people are eventually going to see what that means and why it's so important. And that's one of the reasons I'm writing the book, and that's one of the reasons I'm putting the book out for free, and that's one of the reasons I want anybody that can bother to tolerate my writing will come and look at that and go, oh, yeah, maybe there is something more to this than just, I can't buy coffee. Like, go, that's so irrelevant to your freedom, your privacy, your right to free association. It's meaningless. You have no right to privacy right now. You have no right to free association. That has been abrogated from you long ago, 50, 60 years ago already. It's gone. So this idea, like, we need to preserve it, it's already missing. You've already missed that boat. The only opportunity you have right now is to fix this economic incentive system. And if we don't get that right, then the rest of it's just, you're just going to go, well, I guess I'll go figure out how to be a subsistence farmer out in the middle of nowhere, because that's the only hope I have left,
There's been some attention lately because of the samurai deal and recent regulatory pushes. There's been talk about Eric Hughes wrote a Cypherpunks manifesto in 1993, I believe. A great piece of work talking about privacy versus secrecy, the reasons why as a fundamental human right we have the right to privacy, and that technology is what does this for us. Cryptography and our access to technology makes that happen, and the technologies are here to help you do that. Great piece of work, it's the right thing, and people generally don't know how to do it.
Correct.
We're enmeshed with technologies and the phone in our hand, where it feels liberating, and it's all tracked in data collection, and they know. Yeah. They know. I say they. Well, the corporations or whoever wants to and needs to can know.
Oh yeah.
It's over. Cypherpunks manifesto is the topic of Satoshi's Militia most recent video coming out about freedom technology and what it means. It's an important sort of a foundation for freedom tech. I worry, like we've talked about, that people can get it and then not know what to do. What are you going to do?
Right.
Well,
I can answer that. I mean, it's the easiest thing in the world. You go buy some Bitcoin and sit on it. That's
so there's that. So Bitcoin represents...
That's all you got to do.
In a way, Bitcoin is like the most accessible, tangible, conceptual escape hatch to do that with money. Right. Money being its own foundation of society, and then fix the money, fix the world.
Right.
So there's hope there. I want to go back with that idea. Your book, The Great Realignment, you've got it up on Medium.
Yeah.
You're sharing it as you write it, chapter by chapter.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been thoroughly impressed personally by just chapter 1 on money.
Thank you.
And there's more coming, and I look forward to reading it all. Thoroughly impressed. Going back into history, how many occurred, our presumptions about how that occurred, many of being wrong, and how governments and kings and others have utilized that. And then where it's going is where we are now with money.
Yeah.
I encourage everyone to read it. And you're on largely on Twitter, Tin Money TV.
Tin Money TV, yeah. TINMONEY TV.
So you've got the chapters there, active on Twitter.
Yeah.
I'll be talking about it through and sharing and reading on Satoshi's Militia.
Thank you, sir.
And I look forward to more of all that.
And just as a little add-on, it's tinmoney.medium.com is where you can read the material as it's being written. It's open source book, as it were. I'll probably make a paperback available when it's all done, but for me, it's more important just to have the information out and make sure that I can share what I know within the scope of my knowledge and ability to convey it, like what I think is important about Bitcoin and why. And
authored by Daniel White.
This guy.
So Daniel's the writer and the academic legal mind behind all these ideas. Satoshi's Militia with me is more the video and the spirit behind the patriotism of Bitcoin, the liberty, the independent spirit, and what Bitcoin means for,
absolutely,
for pro-American money and freedom.
And your first video was excellent, by the way. So I'm really excited people to take a look at that stuff. And
videos rolling out every week. We've got various topics.
Yeah,
you've got your chapters coming out. I'll have videos rolling out. The spirit behind it all is the same.
Yeah.
And we're going to have more of these live podcasts as often as we can, I suppose.
Yeah.
So we'll do more of this. This was our first one. Unless you have a final cap to say, what you want to wrap this one up today?
Yeah. Buy Bitcoin, dummies.
Buy Bitcoin. We're orange pilling people as best we can, and it's case by case, but it's happening, folks. So, all right.
Oh, signing off.
Thanks. Signing off. Thanks, everybody.
See you next week.
See you next week.